Hey guys, tonight we are diving into one of the strangest and darkest parts of medieval history. The bizarre ways people tried to discover whether someone was lying. Long before modern detectives, science, fingerprints, or court investigations existed, medieval societies relied on fear, superstition, religion, and painful tests to decide who was innocent and who was guilty. In many medieval towns and villages, people believed that God would directly reveal the truth. If a person survived a dangerous test, they were considered innocent. If they failed, well, the punishment was often terrifying. These strange rituals became known as trials by ordeal, and for hundreds of years, ordinary people lived in fear of them. Imagine waking up one cold morning in a small medieval village. The streets are muddy, smoke rises from wooden chimneys, and church bells echo through the fog. News spreads quickly that someone has been accused of stealing bread from the local market. Within hours, the villagers gather in the town square. There are no lawyers, no proper evidence, no fair investigation. Instead, the accused person must face a public test that could determine life or death. One of the most feared methods was the ordeal by hot iron. The accused would be forced to carry a burning piece of iron across several steps, while priests prayed nearby. Their hands were then wrapped in cloth and examined a few days later. If the wounds appeared to heal properly, the person was declared innocent because people believed God had protected them. But if the wounds became infected or looked worse, everyone believed it was proof of guilt. Another terrifying test involved boiling water. A large iron pot would be filled with water and heated over an open fire until it bubbled violently. Sometimes a stone or metal ring was dropped into the bottom of the pot. The accused had to reach into the boiling water and retrieve the object with their bare hands. Priests again inspected the wounds later, searching for signs from God. What made these trials even more frightening was that many innocent people confessed before the test even began. Medieval prisons were dark, cold, and filthy places filled with rats, disease, and hunger. Some prisoners believed death during the ordeal would be less painful than waiting in a dungeon for weeks. Fear itself became a weapon, but perhaps the strangest method of all was the ordeal by water. In some regions, accused people were tied with ropes and thrown into lakes or rivers. People believed that pure water would reject a guilty person. If the accused floated, they were considered guilty because the holy water supposedly refused to accept them. If they sank, they were innocent. Although sometimes they drowned before anyone could pull them back out. These brutal customs sound unbelievable today, yet they were accepted as normal justice for centuries. Religion controlled nearly every part of medieval life. Most people could not read or write, and many believed that disasters, sickness, storms, and death were signs of divine punishment. If crops failed or disease spread through a village, accusations often followed. Someone had to be blamed. Women were especially vulnerable during these times. Elderly widows, healers, or women who lived alone were often accused of witchcraft or lying. Sometimes all it took was a rumor. If a cow became sick after an argument with a neighbor, suspicion could begin immediately. Fear spread quickly through medieval communities because survival was already difficult enough. Hunger, plague, and war constantly haunted everyday life. And speaking of plague, medieval Europe became even darker during the years of the Black Death. Entire villages vanished. Streets filled with silence except for funeral carts and church bells. Many people believed the plague was punishment from God, while others searched desperately for hidden enemies to blame. Strange medical treatments appeared everywhere. Some people carried flowers to block the terrible smell of death. Others drank bizarre mixtures or burned herbs inside their homes hoping to survive. During this chaotic period, food itself became a symbol of fear and survival. Bread shortages could cause riots. Cheese, meat, and even clean water became precious luxuries for ordinary families. In wealthy castles, nobles still held massive feasts under candlelight, while peasants starved outside city walls. This enormous divide between rich and poor created anger that slowly grew over generations. Medieval kings and nobles also lived in strange ways that seem unbelievable now. Some rulers wore bright red heels to symbolize power and status. Expensive fabrics, giant wigs, and heavy perfumes became signs of wealth. Inside royal courts, appearance mattered almost as much as political power. Nobles competed endlessly to look richer, more elegant, and more important than everyone else around them. Yet despite all the luxury, the deeper we travel into medieval history, the stranger the world begins to feel. Everyday life during the Middle Ages was filled with customs, fears, and punishments that would seem terrifying to modern people. Even simple tasks like eating dinner, walking through town, or visiting a doctor could become dangerous experiences. For most ordinary villagers, life revolved around survival. Families woke before sunrise to work endless hours in muddy fields owned by wealthy lords. Heavy rain could destroy crops. Harsh winters could freeze entire villages into starvation. A single illness might wipe out multiple generations of a family because medicine barely existed in any reliable form. Doctors in medieval Europe often relied on ancient theories rather than science. One of the most popular ideas was called the four humors. People believed the human body contained four fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. If these fluids became unbalanced, sickness followed. Treatments were strange and sometimes horrifying. One common medical practice was bloodletting. Doctors believed removing blood could restore balance to the body. Patients sat nervously while blades or leeches drained blood from their arms. Sometimes weak or starving people became even sicker after the treatment, but many doctors still insisted it worked. Wealthy nobles even kept jars of medicinal leeches inside castles for emergencies. To make matters worse, medieval surgery happened without modern anesthesia. Imagine lying awake while someone cut into your body using rough metal tools, cleaned only with water or wine. Infection spread quickly in these conditions. Even small wounds could become deadly. Many people feared doctors almost as much as disease itself. Meanwhile, religion remained at the center of medieval society. Massive stone cathedrals towered above crowded towns, reminding everyone of heaven, hell, and divine judgment. Priests held enormous influence over daily life. They explained disasters as punishment for sin, and encouraged people to confess constantly. Fear of eternal damnation shaped the thoughts of millions. Because of this intense fear, strange religious punishments appeared across Europe. Some people whipped themselves publicly in hopes of earning forgiveness from God. Others traveled enormous distances barefoot during painful pilgrimages. During periods of plague or famine, crowds marched through streets praying desperately for mercy, while church bells echoed through the cold air. But medieval justice could become even darker than religion. Torture slowly became part of criminal investigations in some regions. Authorities believed pain forced people to reveal the truth. Accused prisoners were chained inside underground cells where sunlight barely entered. Stone walls dripped with moisture. Rats crawled across filthy floors, while prisoners waited in silence, uncertain if they would ever leave alive. One terrifying punishment involved the rack, a wooden device designed to stretch the body painfully. Other prisoners faced iron restraints, public whippings, or humiliating punishments in town squares where crowds gathered to watch. Public suffering became entertainment for many people because violence was common throughout medieval life. Executions themselves often turned into massive public events. Vendors sold food while crowds gathered to witness hangings or beheadings. Some people traveled from nearby villages simply to watch. Children sometimes stood beside their parents observing punishments that today would traumatize entire communities. Death existed openly in medieval society. People saw it constantly through war, plague, starvation, and violence. Even castles, which appear beautiful in modern movies, were uncomfortable and dangerous places. Most castles smelled of smoke, animals, sweat, and sewage. Windows were small because large openings weakened defenses against attacks. Winters inside stone walls were freezing cold. Servants slept on floors, while nobles wrapped themselves in heavy blankets beside fireplaces. And despite all their power, kings and queens lived in constant fear of betrayal. Poisoning became a serious concern in royal courts. Food tasters were sometimes required to eat meals before rulers touched them. Political alliances changed quickly, and nobles secretly plotted against one another for wealth or influence. Medieval warfare was equally brutal. Battles were loud, chaotic nightmares filled with screaming horses, crashing steel, mud, and smoke. Knights in heavy armor charged across bloody fields while arrows darkened the sky above them. After battles ended, survivors often wandered among bodies, searching for wounded friends or valuable weapons. But perhaps the most haunting part of medieval history was the fear of the unknown. At night, forests surrounding villages became places of terror and imagination. Wolves howled in darkness, while travelers whispered. As medieval Europe drifted deeper into centuries of fear and superstition, people became obsessed with signs, omens, and strange rituals meant to protect them from disaster. Life was so uncertain that even the smallest unusual event could send entire villages into panic. A dying cow, a failed harvest, or a sudden storm might convince people that evil forces were nearby. During long winters, darkness arrived early across medieval towns. Families gathered around weak fireplaces while icy winds pushed against wooden walls. Outside, narrow streets disappeared into blackness. Without electricity or modern lamps, nighttime felt endless. Most people feared leaving their homes after sunset because roads were dangerous and stories about spirits, thieves, and demons spread constantly. In many places, people believed witches walked secretly among ordinary villagers. These accusations often began with rumors. A lonely old woman who understood herbs and medicine might suddenly become suspicious. If someone became sick after visiting her home, fear spread quickly. Villagers whispered quietly inside churches and marketplaces, wondering whether dark magic had entered their community. Witch trials became terrifying events. Accused women were sometimes forced to confess crimes they never committed. Priests questioned them for hours while frightened crowds waited outside. Some women admitted to impossible acts simply to end their suffering. Others refused and faced brutal punishments. Fear transformed ordinary people into enemies almost overnight. One particularly disturbing belief involved animals connected to witchcraft. Black cats, ravens, owls, and wolves were often seen as symbols of evil or bad luck. During storms, people imagined supernatural creatures hiding in forests or flying across the night sky. Medieval imagination blurred the line between reality and nightmare. At the same time, medieval punishments continued becoming more severe. Public humiliation was extremely common. Criminals could be locked inside wooden stocks in the center of town, while crowds insulted them and threw rotten food. Some prisoners spent days trapped this way beneath rain, heat, or snow. The goal was not only punishment, but public shame. Thieves sometimes lost fingers or hands. Poachers who hunted illegally in royal forests faced brutal consequences because kings protected hunting lands fiercely. Even stealing bread during famine could lead to imprisonment or execution. Survival itself sometimes became a crime in desperate times. Meanwhile, medieval nobles continued living inside worlds of luxury unimaginable to peasants. Banquets inside castles lasted for hours beneath giant chandeliers and candlelight. Roasted meats covered long wooden tables, while musicians played softly in enormous halls. Nobles wore expensive silk clothing decorated with jewels, feathers, and embroidery. Perfumes filled the air to hide unpleasant smells from crowded castles. But behind all this beauty hid constant paranoia. Poisoning remained a serious threat in royal courts. Servants watched carefully while meals were prepared. Political rivals secretly formed alliances against each other. Some nobles disappeared mysteriously after attending royal feasts. Others were imprisoned inside towers for years after losing political battles. And then there were the dungeons. Deep beneath many castles lay dark underground chambers where prisoners disappeared from public view. These places were cold, damp, and almost completely silent except for dripping water and rattling chains. Tiny windows allowed barely enough light to see. Some prisoners never learned whether it was day or night outside their cells. For wealthy prisoners, conditions could sometimes be survivable. But ordinary prisoners suffered terribly. Disease spread quickly in cramped underground spaces. Food was poor and water often dirty. Many prisoners became weak long before any trial or punishment officially began. Even entertainment during medieval times could seem cruel by modern standards. Public executions drew massive crowds. Jousting tournaments sometimes ended with deadly injuries while audiences cheered. Animal fights entertained nobles and commoners alike. Violence was woven deeply into medieval culture because war, famine, and disease already surrounded daily life. Traveling during these centuries was also incredibly dangerous. Roads were muddy and poorly maintained. Bandits hid along forest paths, waiting to rob travelers carrying coins or goods. Merchants often traveled in groups for protection. If darkness arrived before reaching shelter, many people feared sleeping outdoors because wolves and thieves roamed the countryside. And despite these dangers, medieval Europe remained full of strange beauty. Giant cathedrals rose above cities like mountains of stone and glass. Candlelight reflected across colorful windows, while choirs echoed through enormous halls. By the late medieval period, fear had become part of everyday life so deeply that many people no longer questioned it. Children grew up hearing stories about demons hiding in forests, witches cursing villages, and sinners burning forever in hell. The line between religion and superstition slowly blurred together until nearly every strange event felt connected to something supernatural. During storms, villagers sometimes believed dark spirits were moving through the sky. Thunder echoed across fields while families rushed indoors, closing wooden shutters tightly. Candles flickered inside tiny homes as parents whispered prayers beside fireplaces. For medieval people, nature itself often felt alive and unpredictable, but perhaps nothing frightened Europe more than disease. The memory of the Black Death haunted entire generations for centuries. Even long after the worst outbreaks ended, people remained terrified of sickness returning. A cough in the marketplace or fever in a nearby village could trigger panic almost immediately. Doctors wore strange clothing during plague outbreaks. Some used masks with long beaks, filled with herbs or flowers, believing pleasant smells protected them from disease. Streets became quieter during epidemics. Church bells rang constantly for funerals. Carts carrying bodies rolled slowly through cities, while frightened families locked themselves indoors. And despite all this suffering, medieval medicine still relied heavily on bizarre treatments. People swallowed crushed minerals, animal parts, or strange mixtures recommended by healers. Some believed gemstones carried healing powers. Others trusted prayers more than medicine itself. Survival often depended more on luck than treatment. At the same time, castles across Europe remained centers of both beauty and danger. Great halls glowed with candlelight, while servants carried silver plates filled with roasted meat and wine. Musicians played softly as nobles laughed together beneath giant tapestries. But hidden behind the luxury were endless political games and betrayals. A king could lose his throne overnight. A trusted advisor might secretly work for enemies. Even family members betrayed one another for power. Princes disappeared mysteriously. Noblemen were arrested without warning. Some spent the rest of their lives trapped inside isolated towers, overlooking cold oceans or dark forests. For ordinary people, however, life remained brutally difficult. Most peasants never traveled far from the villages where they were born. They worked endlessly in fields owned by wealthy lords, paying heavy taxes simply to survive. If crops failed, hunger spread quickly. During harsh winters, entire families sometimes starved together inside freezing homes. Yet medieval markets still brought moments of life and color into dark towns. Merchants traveled from distant lands carrying spices, fabrics, candles, jewelry, and strange goods most villagers had never seen before. Crowded streets filled with shouting sellers, wandering musicians, animals, and smoke from cooking fires. Travelers also brought stories from beyond local villages, stories about massive cities, strange kings, terrifying wars, and mysterious lands far across oceans and deserts. For many medieval people, these stories sounded almost magical, because the world beyond their region felt enormous and unknown. At night, however, fear always returned. Without modern lights, darkness swallowed entire towns after sunset. Guards carrying torches walked beside castle walls, while distant wolves howled beyond the forests. Travelers rushed to inns before roads disappeared into blackness. Inside medieval homes, families slept close together beside weak fires. Wind crept through cracks in wooden walls, while rain tapped softly outside. Some nights felt peaceful. Others carried tension and uncertainty, especially during times of war or famine, and wars came often. Armies marched across Europe for land, religion, revenge, or power. Villages burned during invasions. Farmers abandoned homes while soldiers looted food and animals. Survivors rebuilt again and again after destruction passed through their lives. Still, medieval people continued forward. They celebrated weddings, raised children, sang songs, and gathered around fireplaces telling stories late into the night. Even surrounded by hardship, humans searched for comfort wherever they could find it. So, as the cold, medieval night grows quieter, imagine those distant villages hidden beneath moonlight and fog. Imagine flickering candles glowing faintly through tiny windows, while church bells echo somewhere far away in the darkness. A prisoner waits silently inside a stone dungeon. A king studies letters from enemies beside a roaring fire. A frightened villager whispers prayers against disease and bad luck. And beyond the forests, the unknown medieval world stretches endlessly into darkness. And so, as the medieval world slowly faded into history, its stories remained hidden inside ancient castles, ruined villages, forgotten prisons, and silent churches. The Middle Ages were filled with fear, superstition, war, disease, and strange traditions that shaped the lives of millions. People survived harsh winters, terrifying plagues, brutal punishments, and endless uncertainty, while trying to understand a world they believed was controlled by fate, religion, and mysterious forces beyond human understanding. Yet even in the darkness, medieval people still searched for hope. Families gathered around warm fires. Travelers shared stories beneath candlelight. Bells echoed through quiet towns, while markets brought life to cold streets. And despite all the fear surrounding them, ordinary people continued living, loving, praying, and dreaming about a better future. Today, the medieval world feels distant and mysterious, almost like a dream hidden beneath fog and torchlight. But its legends, fears, and strange traditions still fascinate people centuries later. And tonight, as you slowly drift into sleep, imagine those silent medieval villages resting beneath the moonlight, where candle flames flicker softly behind wooden windows. Distant church bells ring through the cold night air, and the strange world of history quietly disappears into darkness once again.